You know, in the earlier session, you talked about how one of the keys to presentations, the first 10%. Well, in a fast-paced organization like this, as we produce so much, oftentimes we leave out the last 10%. Maybe elaborate on why the last 10% is so important.
From a technical standpoint, the last 10% is important in anything. In anything. If you are in a tense, heated conversation and you don't say the last 10% of the conversation, in effect, it's been a huge waste of time and you probably didn't touch the big issue. If you move into a house and the last 10% was for them to make sure that you had running water and they don't, then the rest of the house is only going to be so convenient for you without running water. In any area of life, the last 10% is huge. And there's a lot of teaching on this in terms of like confrontation. Make sure you're saying the last 10%. Make sure you're saying what really needs to be said. But I tend to think of it as who is the end of the line. And I would like to have more of our staff and volunteers assuming the ultimate responsibility that they are the end of the line, that they are the quality control manager. Because when you don't assume that responsibility, somebody else has to. And when they have to come down out of their level where they need to be operating and do your job for you. So it's common for me to get really flustered and frustrated when I have to find a typo on the website or when I have to find a typo on a print piece. And it's not just because I think typos are stupid and I'm kind of OCD. That's true, both of those. I think typos are stupid and I'm OCD. But it's because how can I be the pastor and the visionary leader of the church if I'm also by night the proofreader for the web ministry? I can't do all of that at one time. And it's not just in the web department. We have a fantastic web department. It's not just in the people that are printing the stuff. We have great teams and mistakes happen. But where it becomes an epidemic, I think, is when people see their job as only to get it finished and not to bring it to final form. Because there's a big difference between I finished the part I was asked to do and I made sure that it got where it needed to go ultimately. Here's an example. We had an issue one time with a television program that we had handed off to the television station. And it didn't air correctly, but it was the television station's fault. Well, when I addressed that a few weeks later, when I saw it, it was a major mistake. What I wanted to really point out to our team was, because the report I got back was, it was right when we handed it off to them. And my point is, that's not where your job stops. Your job stops when it's on TV correctly. Because your job was to push all the way to say, it has to air correctly on TV. You know, well, we sent it in the mail, but we had the wrong address and it came back to us. You couldn't have double checked the address, you know, or, and the mistakes happen. That happens. It's okay. But if you think that, well, I did my part. I did what I was assigned to do. It didn't get done, but I did my part. Don't look at me. That's the wrong attitude. In any event, I've got to take responsibility not only for what I do, but I've got to follow it through all the way to the point where it gets done. And in a church like this, where you're working across different departments and one person hands it off to another and another to another, and we're all working together, everybody has to see it as their responsibility. Maybe not in every instance, but if you lean more toward that and say, it's my job to make sure that the project and the stuff that I was responsible for is ultimately presented in the best way, you're going to come out ahead. And that means that you're double checking. That means that you're looking back at stuff. That means that if the printer messes it up, you check it again when it comes back from the printer. That means that if you told somebody to communicate it, you might double check whether or not they did communicate it, especially if they're a new leader that you've put in place. You can take more responsibility a lot of the time and make sure that it gets that final place. Because isn't it awful to do 90% of the work If you fumble the ball on the 10-yard line, you still fumbled the ball and you don't get any points.
Yeah, that's right.
The 90 yards that you got might help you a little bit with field position, but you still didn't put any points on the board. So don't do a touchdown dance on the 10-yard line talking about I did my job. You didn't do your job until the referee does this.